Our highly respected son, Agbakoba, has revealed that EFCC is an unconstitutional organization.
So if we say put aside the Constitution and look at what the EFCC has done and say, well, maybe we can give them a pass mark. I'm not going to give them any damn pass mark. These guys are terrorists. In my view, they terrorize us. They terrorize us. They use their might in that direct quote to terrorize us. Once you say EFCC, you are scared. That is not what a law enforcement agency should be. They ought to be better. So even if I concede, let us put aside the issue of the Constitution.
Recall that 16 governors out of the 36 state governors we have in the country dragged the EFCC to the courts, questioning the laws that establish the EFCC.
Former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, MBA, human rights activist, and democracy scholar, Olisa Agbakoba, SAN, has written to both the Senate and the House of Representatives, asserting that the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, was unconstitutionally established by the federal government. In his correspondence, Agbakoba highlighted constitutional hurdles hindering the fight against corruption and noted that some states are prepared to challenge the constitutionality of the anti-graft agency. He emphasized that this legal challenge will clarify the validity of the EFCC. The letters were sent to Deputy Senate President Barau Jibrin, APC, Kano North, and Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, Benjamin Kalu. The petition is titled Urgent Legislative Attention on Constitutional Reforms Relating to Law Enforcement Agencies and Anti-Corruption Efforts. It will be recalled that the Supreme Court on Tuesday fixed October 22 for the hearing of a suit filed by at least 16 state governments challenging the constitutionality of the laws establishing the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission and two others. Joining us now on the morning show is Olisa Agbakoba, SAN, former president of the Nigerian Bar Association. Good morning, Mr. Agbakoba, SAN, and thank you for joining us on the morning show. Well, 16 state governments have gone to court, and then there's the letter that you wrote, and we've been told that in Wobike versus Federal Republic of Federal Government of Nigeria, in Wobike case, you know, the point was made clearly there that for a treaty ratified by Nigeria that to become law in Nigeria, it must be domesticated, ratified under Section 12 sub 2 of the 1999 Constitution. The argument of the governors is that this process was not followed, that the EFCC, ICPC, you know, NFIU, that these were created through executive whim. Now, you have also taken up the matter. Could you help us clarify the issue and what you expect the National Assembly to do?
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, I had no idea that the cases the states filed were being filed, because I was reviewing my papers for my fall session in the US, and I was doing a paper titled Building Blocks for Economic Stability. And in posing questions to my students, I said, what are the 10 most important factors that impede development? Surprisingly, corruption kept popping up. So I said, this is very familiar to me, because I've been at this EFCC matter from the time of my great friend Nuhu Ribadu. So as I wrote the letter, I got to know that 16 or 17 governors had also filed an action, which is most welcome, because at the end of the day, we need to test institutions. We need to test the validity of the actions of anyone who exercises either legislative or executive authority, because the Supreme Court has power to make that interpretation. Because the case is in court, I'd refrain from discussing the merits, but I'll go around a framework. So, if corruption is a big issue, it's something we must put on the front burner. So I'm very surprised, for instance, that corruption appears in Section 15 of the Constitution under Chapter 2, which is non-justiciable. So you can see the paradox. If corruption is to be an important issue, why is it non-justiciable. But through mechanisms of interpretation, the Supreme Court has held that the EFCC, in the particular cases filed, could do what they did. But as time went on, and in particular the case you referred to, I would urge anyone who is interested in this matter to read the case of Wobike. The Supreme Court castigated the EFCC for being a totally irresponsible organization, going far outside of the scope of its authority, becoming the police, becoming the SFU, becoming the NFU, doing everything. So that's what they cannot do. The other fallacy that I think needs to be debunked is that the National Assembly can exercise power to do anything it likes. No, it can't. The National Assembly's power is constrained by the exclusive list and the concurrent list. So the National Assembly, the big question here is whether the National Assembly can, merely because it's the National Assembly, create any monster. No, it can't. It's limited to the powers given to it, bestowed on it by the Constitution. And my point is that the National Assembly does not have power for some of the reasons you've given, but some of the reasons I have, and I have 10 of them, which I would not like to discuss, given the fact that the matter is in the Supreme Court. So I won't be accused of prejudging a matter that is before the court. But I think my dear friend Femi Falana has provided the perfect answer. By the way, the reason I went to the National Assembly is to say to them, you created this institution. So maybe it's time you also reviewed whether what you created is valid. And let me also do a bit of history on the National Assembly's creation of the EFCC. It was at a time that President Obasanjo was struggling very hard to get the Paris and London clubs right off our debts. And the Paris and London clubs said to Nigeria, well, you don't belong to the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. And not to belong to it would hamper your request for, a loan review. So quickly, the EFCC Act is the fastest legislation ever passed in Nigeria in 2 days. I suspect very strongly that in the course of passing this legislation so fast, a lot of mistakes were made. And one of the mistakes is that the National Assembly exceeded its authority under Section 4 of the Constitution, which imbues it with the legislative powers. It exceeded its authority by several ways. Anyone who reads the Act will actually think that EFCC is the Nigerian police force, because that's what it does. So the one point that can be made is, could we have two police forces when the EFCC describes itself in the Act as a police force? But we know that there's only one police force in Nigeria, and that is the Nigeria Police Force. So these and other reasons are what compelled me to say the time has come to deal with this issue squarely. We can't have corruption at the level we have it without saying the agency that, and by the way, let me be very clear, I have absolutely nothing against some of the very fine gentlemen who have worked in the EFCC for a very long time. A name comes to mind in particular, and that is Rotimi Jacobs. He's committed himself as a professional. He's been there for the last 30 years. He's risen to the rank of a senior advocate of Nigeria, and I respect all that he has done.
All right.
That is not to say there isn't a difference between Mr. Jacobs and the EFCC. And that was a point I made to Mr. Bauer when he was on seat as chairperson. So we're going to see what the Supreme Court will say when they come to tackle the point. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that was very important to set the tone for this conversation. Always good to see you, sir. Now, one of the things I would like to ask you,
Thank you.
And like you said, just because the matter is in court, there are limits to what we can discuss as to your prayers and what the conclusion of the matter would be. But let me ask, number one,
yes,
how effective do you think the EFCC has been since its creation in 2003? The reason I ask this question is, if you were very effective, would you be pursuing this matter? Or would you be calling perhaps for a review of the extent of the powers of the EFCC?
Good question. The EFCC, to my mind, if you take the huge amounts of fraud in the country, if you take the huge amounts of corruption in the country, unfortunately, the EFCC has not been effective. I'll just give you one example, because we need money, if you remember that. I was looking up a couple of similar agencies around the world. One that came to mind was the National Crime Detection Agency in the UK. Do you know that the National Crime Detection Agency contributes about 3% to the national budget? Anybody who is landing into Abuja Airport will see thousands upon thousands of empty houses. And there is no need to tell me that those houses have been gotten and built by corrupt, laundered money. So why is the EFCC not focusing on that? I have a client who came to me to say, the EFCC is pursuing me because I'm being accused of not paying rents. They didn't believe that. So if you ask me, the EFCC, in spite of all its braggadocio, hasn't done much. It hasn't done much. Corruption is endemic. It's growing. It's not coming down. So the EFCC is not an efficient organization, period. Apart from that, as I said, it's an unconstitutional organization. So maybe Femi Falana's point, which I saw this morning, is the best way to go. Simply constitutionalize the EFCC. Set out its powers so that it is different from the ICPC. I believe that the ICPC that was established in 2002 was really the organization that should have dealt with crime, corruption. Independent Corrupt Practices is the name of the ICPC. This other one, EFCC, established in 2003, deals with economic and financial crimes. And they've gone way beyond their mandate. Way beyond their mandate. Chasing on the principle of federalism. Okay. The federal government is different from state governments. Okay. So what is the EFCC doing in interfering with matters concerning the states?
Okay. So
yes, Ruben, I was hearing you saying okay.
Okay, Rufai here, sir. Good to see you again, sir.
Oh, Rufai. Right.
My question is going to be a double-edged sword. Are you saying an organization that had close to 3,785 convictions in 2022 has not done well? Is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. You know, are you saying the EFCC has not done well?
If you look at the totality.
Yes.
If you look at the totality, I don't dispute that they have not done cases.
Yes.
But what type of cases? How many convictions have they had in respect of senior public officers?
Over.
It's not chasing around people.
Over $121 million recovered.
Yes.
You're saying they've not done well. You see how many convictions?
How much is that in the
as regards senior
how much
people?
Is that in the
you said many
how much is that in the context of the stolen money?
How much is that in the context?
No, that's just you now. How much is that in the context?
That's just for 1 year, 2022.
No.
You also said, I think Joshua Darie, I can mention names on and on and on. Joshua Darie, the Yaya Bello they are going after, most governors that have gone to visit the EFCC, after, and many investigations they have on, the case of the former Anambra governor, are these not big elite individuals? Are these not big people in society?
Sure, they are. But that's not the point. The point is, like the opaqueness of the NNPC. It's not enough to say that the NNPC produces crude oil for Nigeria. The point is, what is it doing for the economy? So you have to take it as a holistic process. And in my view, if the EFCC were even to publish its annual accounts on a yearly basis, then we can know what it's doing, whether it has an impact. If you ask the man on the streets, I doubt that they would be taking the position you are taking. In my view, and I could be wrong, because I'm just Tony Agbakoba, I do not pretend that I have all the wisdom, but as far as I'm concerned, I feel that the EFCC is being hampered by the unclarity in relation to its constitutional establishment. And by the way, two important persons have made this point. Upon being, confirmed as Attorney General of the Federation on the floor of the National Assembly, Lateef Fagbemi, who is a very good friend, said that he thought that the configuration of the law enforcement agencies on serious crime was something that he would address. He didn't see why we should have an EFCC or an ICPC, all clashing heads on what should be done, not to add the nefarious activities of the DSS, that comes in when it's supposed to be doing internal security. But these are micro issues that I think can be tackled if the National Assembly agrees to hold a public hearing as I have requested.
But how do you, in wrapping up, how do you blame an EFCC that takes the cases to court and you have a liturgy in the legal process? Look at the case of Yaya Bello. EFCC has put all their cases to court.
Sure.
They've gone after all the big people. You say they've not, investigated the NNPC and everything. Yeah, that's a point. I mean, I concede to you on that. But in other cases, the fear of EFCC has become the beginning of wisdom. If not for EFCC, we will not know. I don't support EFCC directly. I have my grasp with EFCC. But I'm just playing devil's advocate here. If we've got for EFCC, we will not know the billions and billions being talked about with Yaya Bello. We will not know the billions and billions being talked about in other quarters. We will not know the recovery of monies.
Sure.
So EFCC, however imperfect, have stamped their authority one way or the other in the economic and financial crime space in the country. Shouldn't we just cut them some slack as a result of this?
I disagree.
And fix them what needs to be fixed?
Sure. I'll just give you a good example. The current budget has a deficit of about 12 trillion. If the EFCC were to concentrate on the property that has been laundered in Abuja, we will not have a deficit. So you're looking at specific names, and I agree with you entirely, which is why I made the point that there are very, very many, good guys in the EFCC. One person I have the greatest respect for is the gentleman I had mentioned earlier. So there are fine gentlemen in the EFCC. I don't believe that the current chair isn't a fine gentleman. But that's not the point. The point is the EFCC constitutional? Don't stray from that point. Is the EFCC constitutional? You must work within the Constitution. That's what Professor Wambeze called the notion of limited government.
Mr. Agbakoba.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Falana SAN, his argument is almost like a counter-argument to yours. He is saying that your premise is based on federalism and the Constitution, and that therefore the EFCC is an unlawful organization. Quite a lengthy thing, and that you had appeared in a case. I think Ondo Attorney General versus AG Federation. He quoted that case. He also quoted
Abia.
He also quoted AG Abia versus AG Federation and a number of other cases, including Olafisoye case and all of that. However, when you say, okay, you can understand where it's coming from, that the EFCC, ICPC should be constitutionalized. How? Because now he's saying
put it in the Constitution.
He's saying that the governors should not have gone to the Supreme Court. But the governors in the 16 state governments, they are saying that in fact EFCC, ICPC, Process of Crime Act should be nullified. They are asking for a nullification.
Yes.
Because it's unconstitutional, it's illegal.
But I'm not.
Now, what happens?
I'm not the Ruben. I'm not the. No, I'm not. No, I'll stop you there. I'm not the governors. I'm Agbakoba. I'm different. Don't make a case as if I'm the governors. I'm talking about my letter, not the governors.
No. I'm just asking. No, I'm just asking for your opinion. Whether you think that these bodies should nullify.
No. I'm sorry. That is not a question I will answer because I didn't go to court. I wrote a letter distinct from the governors. So I'm not. If you ask the governors those questions, I have my own clear view why the EFCC is an unconstitutional organization. And remember, Ruben, this is the point I've been making for the last 30 years. It's not today. And as I said, I have nothing against the EFCC, but I don't think that the EFCC is doing what it ought to do in the context of poverty. If you read people like Thomas Piketty on capitalism, he will tell you inequality is caused by poverty and corruption. And I feel that if the EFCC is doing its job properly, it will get a lot more money than Rufai is suggesting. So I'm not going to make a case for the governors. I'm not sitting here talking about the governors. I'm talking about me and my concern about the EFCC. And the only point I take from what my brother Femi Falana says is to resolve this matter, simply constitutionalize the anti-corruption agencies so there will be no dispute. But right now, as far as I'm concerned, until proven wrong, there is a problem with the EFCC's constitutional arrangements because it is beyond the scope of the National Assembly to make a law. I don't even want to refer to the point you made, which is a very strong point about Section 12 of the Constitution. and whether under the United Nations Convention, a legislation should have been passed. The Mobike case recognized that the EFCC was created as a result of that convention, and the convention was brought to Nigeria, and the convention introduced the EFCC bypassing Section 12. That's a problem for the Supreme Court to resolve. But that's not my point. My point is simply that the EFCC's creation is outside the legislative scope of the National Assembly. That's my point. Whether I'm right or wrong will be proved when the case is heard. And if I'm wrong, and in any case, let's be clear. Why are we afraid to have discussions? This is a democracy, for Christ's sake. Yes. Why are we afraid to have discussions? I should be saluted for bringing points up. I've been bringing points up. I brought the point up about the effect of the FCT and its impact on the electoral process. People have to speak. That's why it's a democracy. It's because we don't speak, we're all cowards. Nobody says a thing that we're not growing. So please, you should be encouraging me to talk. No. And let me also ask other Nigerians to speak.
That's why you are.
Let's all speak, please.
That's why you are.
Let's all speak.
Our guest is still Mr. Olisa Agbakoba, SAN, former president of the Nigeria Bar Association. Mr. Agbakoba, can you hear us now from the studio? Hello, sir. Hello?
Can you stop that?
Sir, you can hear us now? We have this connection problem. Mr. Agbakoba, SAN, can you hear us from the studio? He's still not hearing us. Okay. Well, I wanted to ask Mr. Agbakoba that one of the points made by Femi Falana SAN is that in another case, the court had ruled that the EFCC is neither a state nor a federation. Okay, I understand we have him now. Mr. Agbakoba, are you back with us? You can hear us?
Sure, I can hear you, Ruben.
Thank you very much. Yes. I was asking for a set of clarifications. Sure. One of the points that Mr. Falana SAN made in his own statement is that in another case in the Supreme Court, that the position had been taken that the EFCC is neither a state nor a federation or is a section of the federation. And that to that extent, the EFCC cannot be brought to the Supreme Court. So do you agree with him in that regard that the governors should have gone to perhaps another court? That's a precedent that he established in that his own statement. What do you think about that?
Yes. I think Femi is procedurally correct. Unfortunately, I haven't read it. So what the Supreme Court's jurisdiction to entertain, the Supreme Court has three jurisdictions: original, advisory, and appellate. So this case is proceeding on the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction, which would mean state versus federation or federation versus National Assembly. But it is the same Supreme Court that somersaulted and took that case concerning Emefele's printing of notes, remember? Printing of notes. Yeah. And the Supreme Court said, in spite of the fact that the CBN was an agency, it would have jurisdiction. So I'm not sure. But generally speaking, as I understand it, it's the state versus the federation and the National Assembly. So I don't know how the Supreme Court will deal with this point. But if the Supreme Court has taken a matter in respect of an agency, then I think that they are bound by their decision unless reversed.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr.
I hope that point is clear.
Very clear.
Yeah.
All right. So this is not the first time you've talked about the EFCC. I recall in 2022, during the Kogi State government issue, you had actually talked about the politicization of the EFCC. And so since then, you've asked the EFCC to do what they were set up to do as opposed to involving itself in politics. Has anything improved since then? This was under a different administration. Now, but under a Tinubu administration, the Kogi State former governor is still under investigation by the EFCC. Has this changed in any regard? And since we're talking about constitutionalizing it, what are some of the things that should be enshrined in that to ensure that we strengthen that institution and it actually does what it was set up to do? Because like you said, corruption is still rife. We still need a body to tackle the menace of corruption.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to answer this question is why I wrote that letter. And I do hope that the letter and my friend Femi's letter to the National Assembly will provide the canvas to deal with these issues. But I think in order to be able to resolve this issue about the legitimacy of the EFCC, it's either for the National Assembly to clarify exactly what the EFCC should be doing. If you read Professor Nwabeze's treatise in several books, he feels that the EFCC, and that was a point I made in Asia Beer that I appeared, that the EFCC has no business under the principle of federalism to trench on the powers of a state. I accept that, but unfortunately we were overruled. So you are bound by the Supreme Court's decision. But democracy tells you that Nigeria is a federal system with 36 states. So I now see that some states, I think Lagos, has passed its own anti-graft legislation. And when we talk about the federal process, so we're now expanding the argument to what type of federalism do we need? We don't need this sort of centralized federalism where Abuja takes all the decisions. The most important decision ever taken by President Tinubu are twofold. One, the removal of subsidy. It may sound controversial. And two, the fact that he challenged the usurpation of powers, again about usurpation of powers by the states, emasculating the local governments, crippling them. I was so delighted to see Fagbemi argue that case, and he was successful. So I was making that point earlier about we have to test the constitutional processes. Whether one believes in it or not, we have to test it. It's the only way to strengthen the institutions of Nigeria. And I will keep on testing it. And I might be wrong, but as far as I'm concerned, the EFCC is going way beyond its remit in chasing people that are not within its scope of powers. And Mobike, which I have right here, I've read it, Mobike makes clear that the EFCC is a rogue organization doing what it ought not to be doing. Okay. So let this case that the governors file really determine the scope of the powers of the EFCC. And hopefully, my letter to the National Assembly, coupled with Femi's letter to the National Assembly, will then assist the National Assembly to review everything and then solve the problem by constitutionalizing the EFCC or determining the scope. Why do we have the EFCC, the Special Fraud Unit, and the ICPC, and the police all doing the same thing? It doesn't make sense, and they were not catching anything. Okay. So Rufai was talking about monies recovered by the EFCC. I applaud them for that. But how much of it is being recovered, stolen money? How much of it is being recovered? So President Tinubu has done the right thing by, yes. Okay, I mean, I listen to you.
Like you said, right? Go on. I get your point. And I get the point for federalism here. And I get all of those arguments. But in also arguing further, my points will be number one. We can say the EFCC has not done enough. Now we are saying it's good the governors have taken them to court. Are the governors not taking the EFCC to court for their own selfish interest? Because, okay, look at states like Kogi. What do you expect? Kogi has always been at loggerheads, even when Yaya Bello was there with the EFCC. At some point, they had whatever the EFCC, at some point there. Most governors that you see have always been at loggerheads with the EFCC. So, as regards to state governors,
absolutely,
I don't care. But most importantly, the point of, you were trying to make comparison, okay, the body in the UK that does that, a lot of that, okay, we're still having a lot of empty houses in Abuja, EFCC have not found them. In the UK too, you have a lot of empty houses bought with fraudulent money in Chelsea. It's not all of them that have been revamped. The EFCC will tell you that they've been recovering most of those properties, and putting them out there. Yes, you've made a strong point as regards transparency. That could be the order of the day. You've made a strong point as regards even the money recovered by the EFCC might be relooted. That's a strong point. But my fear is throwing the baby away with the bathwater because some governors are disgruntled with the process because it doesn't favor them in the end. Now somebody say maybe they go dip their hand in the cookie jar. Now we send them message. I mean, if we've had governors in this country that EFCC didn't need to call. EFCC didn't call Shekarawa after his time. Sure. EFCC didn't call Donald Duke after his time. So I also am against the EFCC on a lot of things, like the invasion in Urban FM in Enugu. But when it comes to calling a spade, EFCC too has brought some sanity to the system. That's just my argument. So I don't care too much about the state governors. I'm looking for lacunas.
No. Well, Rufai, we're not on the same page, unfortunately.
It's
you
fine.
are talking about the things the EFCC has done. And I've just told you that I even recognize that. But we can't, because EFCC has done nice things, say that Nigeria, it's like saying that somebody is doing something proper, but he is doing it unconstitutionally. The time for Nigeria to be driven by constitutional processes is now, which is why in the oscillation of democracy, we have not gone beyond being a semi-autocratic state in the last 23 years, precisely because of what you are saying. Nigeria must be run on the principles of constitutionalism. We see President Trump talking absolute trash every day, breaking the Constitution, telling lies. Do you support that?
No.
We have to run Nigeria on the basis of the Constitution. No matter how good you are, no matter what you do, I don't care how far the EFCC has done things correct. Are they doing it constitutionally is the question mark. That is the bottom line.
What about agencies?
Otherwise, we'll go nowhere.
What about agencies like police and some other governmental agencies that are going against the Constitution, that are going against beyond their bounds? Should we also beam the searchlight on all of them? You know, because it's good to bring conversations to the table. Should we also beam the searchlight on all of them, apart from the EFCC and the ICPC?
Do I support that? I will refer you to the case of Bayo Johnson, which I decided well before Arise was created, over 20 years ago, on the point of holding charge. I was the one that destroyed the holding charge, whereby the police can pick people up on weekends and put them in prison. So I have tackled many things in the country that I find wrong.
But
That's
they still do that till date, sir.
So you ought to be giving me a medal. You ought to be giving me a medal.
I give you your flowers,
for bringing these things to the attention of the public.
Okay, Mr. Agbakoba.
But I will take it. I will accept the flower.
Mr. Agbakoba.
But I prefer a medal.
Let's go beyond constitutionalism, just very briefly. Now, some people are saying that the governors are going to court because they see the EFCC as a tool of persecution, as a witch hunt institution, beyond constitution and all that. Do you think that this is a case of corruption fighting back, as some people will claim?
It's a good question. It's a tricky, good question that you asked, Dr. Abati. Look, let's be honest. Let's, put aside the Constitution and accept that the EFCC, like Rufai says, has obviously done something good. But the EFCC has also done a lot of bad things. Even Tafa, rogue as he was, being dragged, was that correct? In a sane society, you bring a person and drag him, a former inspector general of police? That's not right. So if we say, put aside the Constitution and look at what the EFCC has done and say, well, maybe we can give them a pass mark. I'm not going to give them any damn pass mark. These guys are terrorists. In my view, they terrorize us. They terrorize us. They use their might in that direct quote to terrorize us. Once you say EFCC, you are scared. That is not what a law enforcement agency should be. They ought to be better. So even if I concede, let us put aside the issue of the Constitution. But one thing I must agree with Rufai, the deficiencies in the system is no reason why anyone should try to get away. Because that would be, defeating the entire thing.
Absolutely.
No one should take advantage. And I know that yes.
The former Nigerian Bar Association president, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, SAN, has alerted the National Assembly about constitutional issues concerning law enforcement agencies, particularly the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, which he claims are unconstitutionally established. In a letter dated back to October 14th of this year, addressed to the Deputy Senate President Barau Jibrin and Deputy Speaker Benjamin Kalu, Agbakoba has argued that the EFCC exceeds the National Assembly's powers and hinders the government's anti-corruption efforts outlined in Section 13 of the 1999 Constitution. He expressed support for the ongoing legal challenge by 16 states contesting the EFCC's legitimacy, stating this move could clarify the commission's validity. Agbakoba called for a public hearing to discuss necessary reforms within Nigeria's legal and institutional frameworks, emphasizing the need for coordination amongst law enforcement agencies in combating corruption. The Supreme Court is set to hear the case on the 22nd of October. And joining us now, we have a conversation around the legality of the EFCC establishment and the call by former NBA President Dr. Olisa Agbakoba on the National Assembly to review this constitution. We have Adeyinka Olumide Fusika, a senior advocate of Nigeria, here to discuss this with us here on Newsday. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
Well, I'd say that many would agree with what Dr. Agbakoba has pointed out in his letter, that the powers under which the EFCC were established go beyond the powers of the National Assembly and therefore make it unlawful. What is your take on this discussion?
Well, first of all, I must start by acknowledging the role that Dr. Olisa Agbakoba has played in bettering the current democracy. Without his sacrifice of blood, under the military, maybe we will not be where we are today. So I understand this, that he's disappointed about the situation of the country, especially when it comes to law enforcement, the adjudication of disputes in society, and so on and so forth. But I do believe that I would say that maybe that has affected his disappointment, has affected his I don't want to be his perception of these issues, which I think he should. I would urge him to look at again. Of course, I disagree with him if he says, from what I read in the papers, that he said the EFCC is an unconstitutional body or something like that. I completely disagree with him. And when he suggests that the body was set up outside the legislative competence or powers of the National Assembly, I also say that that is not. I disagree with him respectfully on that. We need to be careful because this is an issue that is already before the Supreme Court. So I think that is a many-pronged attack on the existence of the EFCC, court, legislature, and all that, so that if one does not work, maybe the other one would work. So I disagree with him. It's not. I would strongly suggest and argue that the legislature, the National Assembly, in making that law, the EFCC Act, did so within its legislative competence. If one has to, I said we have to be careful about the case in court before the Supreme Court. We are not supposed to be making comments and all that. We should allow the Supreme Court, the masters of the law, in Nigeria to make a decision on it. But I'm tempted to just quickly make a comment that if I were to be arguing before the Supreme Court, I would strongly argue and contend that the entire basis of the suit before the Supreme Court is very, very doubtful. The entire basis is that the EFCC Act was made pursuant to the UN Convention, and that under the 1999 Constitution, Section 12, the National Assembly didn't have the sole right to pass that law without the concurrence of 2/3 of the states. And I would say that is putting historical facts upside down. The EFCC Act was first made in the year 2002. And you can check this out. The UN Convention that they are talking about came into effect in October of 2003. So it is wrong. I mean, it is not correct to say that the making of the EFCC Act was based on the convention, the UN Convention that was made in 2003. That alone should put an end to the entire argument that the National Assembly made the law without consulting the the State's House of Assembly because the law is based on the UN Convention. The act was already in existence. And I think the case that they are citing, the case of Dr. Nwobike against against the Federal Republic of Nigeria, I think they are just misinterpreting, misapplying. I would strongly argue, if I were to be, I'm handling the case, I would strongly argue before the Supreme Court that, that contention is also not, it's just, they are saying in that decision what they want to see. Because all that the judge said, or the justice of the court said in that case was that there's an Article 15 of the UN Convention, which is against bribery and corruption. Are they suggesting that before the 2003 UN Convention, bribery and corruption and so on were not illegal in Nigeria? Were they authorized? We have all the criminal codes that's all over the place. These have always been crimes in Nigeria. We don't need the UN Convention to tell us that collecting bribe and so on and so forth are criminal offenses in Nigeria. But like I've said, the EFCC Act, go and check it, you can verify, it was 2002, it wasn't 2003. The convention they are talking about came into being in 2003. So how can you say that they made the act and so on and so forth based on a 2003 convention that was not in existence when it was made? So that's the suggestion. I will also strongly contend before the court that if you look at the section 12 of the Constitution of Nigeria that they are talking about, if you look at section 12.2, which is what they are basing it on, it only says that you need the concurrence if a treaty deals with a subject outside the exclusive legislative list, which belongs solely to the federal government. If a treaty deals with it, then you need the concurrence of 2/3 of the states in order to domesticate such a treaty. Where it is within the exclusive legislative list, then you don't need the concurrence of the states on that. And if you look, you go to the 1999 Constitution, there are about, I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 60 items on that list. 60 items on the exclusive legislative list. And if you look at, just give me, go to, for instance, item 31. Item 31 of the exclusive legislative list says, deals with implementation. The federal government, the National Assembly has the right to make laws on implementation of treaties relating to matters on the exclusive legislative list. That's item 31. You go to item 45, deals with the right of the National Assembly to make laws on police and other security services established by law. The EFCC is a security service, so how can you say that if you go to item 60, it talks about the establishment and regulation of authorities for the federation or any part thereof, to promote and enforce the observance of the fundamental objectives and directive principles contained in the Constitution.
Now, if you
and then you go to item 68, it says, any matter.
Well, if you allow me to interrupt you, please. Apart from saying, yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Apart from saying, that the EFCC is unconstitutional, he also noted a lack of cooperation between the law enforcement agencies. And I'm sure you're aware that some civil society organizations have also been raising concern about selective, prosecution of elite personalities by the EFCC. When we do have some serving lawmakers and party leaders who also have cases that have not been prosecuted. So I'm wondering, if you say the EFCC is constitutional, then should it be reformed?
No, so you see, there are two different. You now get the point I'm trying to make between when you say the body itself is unconstitutional. You want to throw away the baby with the bath waters, as they say. You're saying that you are disappointed. In my introductory comment, I said he's obviously disappointed with what has been going on. There's no doubt about that. If you go, I am in contention with the EFCC in so many cases. I defend people against them when I believe that they are going outside their remit. I fight them, I write petitions, and so on and so forth. But that is quite different from saying the body itself is unconstitutional. When you say it is unconstitutional, it means all the trials they've had since the body was set up, the convictions, the forfeitures and all that, everything becomes null and void. There's a difference between the two. You cannot say, if you say, for instance, that, I have cases where I've taken them up on some of their officers involved in corrupt practices and so on and so forth. Like I say, it's a Nigerian institution. You have Nigerians working in that institution. So you cannot, it shouldn't be strange to us that some, within the organization may be selling investigation, selling prosecution, but that doesn't define the institution as a whole. You just have bad eggs that needs to be dealt with or to be corrected so that they change their ways. To now say that the body is unconstitutional because you are disappointed, you've had nasty experiences, and I grant him that what he said about non-coordination and all that, I will tell you straightforwardly, since 2002, if you look at the level of corruption in 2002 to what it is now, it's even worse. So you can question how effective has this organization. How effective has this organization? Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we have exhausted our time, but we do get your point. We do get your point.
Many has been speaking against the EFCC lately over the manner in which they discharge their activities. Many believe that the EFCC is a tool and an instrument of witch hunt by the political leaders. Many believe that those in power uses the EFCC as a tool to witch hunt their political opponents and bring them to their toes.